Hello and welcome back. So this is the weekly look at the top performers from last week, and as always, they have to be under 50% ownership. And we'll look at 3 forwards, 2D, a goalie, maybe an honorable mention in there as well. But there is a special bonus at the end, the top climbers on the Data Draft player rankings for category leagues with hits and blocks. Now this is a good indicator of guys who have had great weeks, which is what we're featuring here, and it's why you're looking at Sidney Crosby. He's obviously not 50% owned, but he did have 6 points in his last 3 games, so he gets the cover. But nonetheless, let's start right in. And the first player we're going to talk about this week is Boone Jenner, 33% owned. I mentioned him in the previous week's video, not this one that just came out, but last week as a potential ad because the Jackets had 4 games. If you picked him up, he did really well for you. 2 goals, 1 assist, 1 power play point. Nothing crazy there in terms of just straight production, but it's the peripherals that get you. 14 shots, 8 hits, 6 blocks, so he's covering a little bit of everything. Season performance, not great, but not bad either. 26 points in 39 games, 7 power play points, a game winner, and his shot volume is really good. So as we look at his player hub, his shot volume stands out, 93rd percentile. He's also 91st percentile in goals with a .36 goal per game pace. So that's really what you're getting access to in terms of his top 2 categories, but he has a really high floor in terms of everything. So blocks, over 1 per game, hits almost 2 per game, gets some power play production. He's still on the top power play unit, getting some assist coverage as well. Again, the point per game I would like to see come up a little bit, but in terms of what you're going to get for a complete player in category leagues with hits and blocks, you're not going to be able to find much better than Boone Jenner. He's an 81, which is significant. There's not that many players above him that are going to be available on your wire. At only 33% ownership, he's typically a great streaming option, and I've gone to him a couple of times. I've mentioned him on the channel a couple of times. So an excellent week for Boone Jenner, and he is one of the most complete players we're going to talk about today. But let's move to his teammate, Kirill Marchenko. Not Kirill the Thrill, that's a different guy, but this guy is one of a kind. There's nothing else to say. 4 goals, 4 games, so a goal per game, 3 power play goals in that span, 10 shots. And the crazy thing is, if you look at the season performance, 13 goals, 0 assists. So he's, I don't even know how you do that, because eventually you're going to shoot the puck, it's going to bounce off the goalie, and somebody will put it in. And that hasn't happened yet. So he's just a goal guy. 6 power play goals, in terms of 6 out of 13 of his goals are on the power play. 50 shots, so getting some shot volume. He had a 2-goal game here. He had a 3-game goal scoring streak in this chunk, so he was getting it done last week for sure. And if we look at his player hub, you're going to notice the 0 percentile for assists per game, which brings down his overall rating. So if we took that out, he'd probably be in the mid-60s and would be ownable in fantasy. The other thing that I usually look for players who are below 60 on the rating scale here is they have to be elite level in one thing, and he certainly is. 0.48 goals per game. That's a really, really good pace. I believe that's close to a 40-goal pace, if I'm not mistaken. 97th percentile in that category. So he is a goal scorer. He gets power play goals as well, so his power play production is pretty good. If his shot volume was a little bit better, he could potentially be the guy that I would be personally using to replace Cole Caulfield. But there's 2 problems with that. 1, he isn't dual eligible, and 2, he doesn't get the 3 or 4 shot per game volume that Cole Caulfield did. But nonetheless, he's a goal scoring weapon, and if you are in a very deep league and you want somebody that's going to get you goals, because a lot of points leagues have goal weighting a little bit heavier than most, so this is a guy that can do that for you, and he's only 3% owned, so that's going to definitely be available for you on your waiver wire. But nonetheless, an excellent week for Marchenko. Now, our next forward is Frankie Vatrano, 5% owned, dual eligible winger. He's been red hot in the last week. 3 games, 4 goals, 1 assist, 5 points, 19 shots. That's 6.33 shots per game. Obviously on the season, nothing crazy there. 23 points in 50 games, 147 shots though. That's incredible. That's almost exactly 3 shots per game, just doing the quick math, but he is a -22. So if you have plus minus, you got to look at that and be a little bit careful. Now the Vatrano and the Ducks played the Coyotes twice. And when I first saw that, I'm like, oh, he racked it up against the Coyotes, but no, he broke out with a hat trick and an 8-shot game against Colorado in a game that I could not believe my eyes that they actually won. And not only that, but they won 3 straight which is probably the first time all year that that's happened. So kind of incredible that we've waited this long to get a 3-game win streak from the Ducks, but it happened. If we look at his player hub, it's pretty good, a 69 overall, and you're getting a pretty decent floor on everything, and then that elite level shot volume, 2.94 shots per game. That's what you want access to if you have a point league with 1 point per shot or something like that, or if you're in a categories league and you're just trying to fill shots. Obviously, he's a goal scorer by nature. The goal totals, I would like to see a little bit higher than this because of that being his specialty, but nonetheless, excellent week for Vatrano, and his shot volume is something that you would want to access him for. And we do have one more guy, and that is Nick Schmaltz. So he also had a really good week. 4 goals in 3 games, 5 points in 3 games, just like Vatrano. 11 shots, so not quite as high as Vatrano. But the cool thing here is they played each other twice. And a good player on a bad team playing another bad team, usually you would expect him to go off against those teams. But instead, he went off against the St. Louis Blues. And he had 3 goals, 1 assist, a power play point, 3 shots in that game. So both Vatrano and Schmaltz played each other twice and had a hat trick on the game in between. So that's kind of crazy. I didn't think, it's not statistically relevant, but I thought that was pretty interesting. On the season, the numbers are pretty good. 28 points in 34 games, 11 goals, 17 assists, 6 power play points, 2 game winners, and he's only a -2 despite being on the Coyotes, which is a little bit noteworthy. Now, if we look at his player hub, 66 rating, and if you don't have hits and blocks, he becomes an 84 on the Data Draft Player Hub with no hits and blocks. So he is pretty valuable in leagues without these 2 categories because he's getting excellent point per game coverage. The goal per game is pretty nice. That's close to a 30 goal pace. Assists are good, 87th percentile. The shots you'd like to see a little bit higher, but 2 shots per game is okay. That's doable. And then you also get 0.17 power play points per game, 79th percentile. So he's covering the offensive categories pretty well. And that's what you would expect. Top line exposure with Keller, center, right wing, dual eligibility, and he's 18% owned. So he's likely a reliable streaming option that you can keep coming back to. But an excellent week for both Vatrano and Schmaltz. But now let's turn to the defenseman. And this defenseman, Sam Girard, 10% rostered, 6th ranked defenseman last week in category leagues with hits and blocks, 23rd overall. He has 9 points in his last 12 games, so it goes back a little bit farther than this. But last week, 3 games, 1 goal, 3 assists, 4 points, a power play point, 9 shots, and 11 blocks. That's kind of really insane to see him block that many shots and put up that level of production. On the season, 42 games, 16 points, 4 power play points, and a game winner. He's a -8. That's the only thing. Obviously, Colorado has been struggling at times. It's trying to stay healthy, and I guess he's been one of the guys that's been out there a little bit more for the goals against. But nonetheless, he's a relatively offensive defenseman, not known for his defensive prowess. Now, if we look at his player hub, you do see the blocks show up, 83rd percentile. So this isn't abnormal, the 11 blocks. It's just a higher number than you're used to seeing. He's usually averaging 1.3, and he was close to 4 blocks per game. So much better week this week for that category. But he does cover a little bit of power play. He gets second power play unit time. Then he also gets some assists, a little bit of shot volume, but you'd like to see that a lot higher. The hits aren't really there. The goal production is not great, and overall the point production is not great either. So hopefully this week was him starting to break out. Maybe it was something that it could potentially be used in a trade for Colorado if they're going to try to move a piece out. Dollar for dollar, he's making like over $5 million, so maybe a deadline move, and maybe this week that he just had helps facilitate that deadline move. But nonetheless, excellent week for Sam Girard, 10% owned. He's probably there for you on all waiver wires. Now, the last defenseman we're going to cover, I mentioned him much earlier in the season when Thomas Chabot was out and he was filling in, so it's nice to see some production with Chabot in the lineup, and that's Jake Sanderson. So 29% owned, 7th ranked defenseman last week in Yahoo category leagues with hits and blocks, 28th overall. He's a pretty complete hits and blocks just blocks. The blocks are 93rd percentile. The power play production is pretty good, 0.22 on the power play, 84th percentile. The assists are pretty good as well, 76th percentile. And that's what you're seeing. No goals. The goal production is pretty low. The point production is pretty low because of that. And so you got 4 assists in 3 games last week. 3 of those were on the power play. Not a lot of peripheral coverage. I believe 6 shots, maybe 6 blocks, no hits. And then on the season, you're getting a lot of that in terms of no hits and stuff like that. 20 points in 49 games, 11 power play points, which you like to see. 85 blocks, 84 shots on goal. So this is a guy that's pretty much a blocks defenseman with a little bit of power play exposure, if that's what you're looking for. Mostly a specialty tool in that regard because he doesn't get you hits, he doesn't get you goals, and because of that, he's not getting you a ton of points either. But nonetheless, a great week from Jake Sanderson. Now, as we turn to our goaltender of the week, it was no debate. He was the number 1 ranked Yahoo goalie this week, and that's Anton Forsberg, 45% owned, so he might be there for you. Probably in shallower leagues, he will be there. In deeper leagues, maybe not. But last week, 3 games played, 2 wins, 1.18 goals against, .964 save percentage, and a shutout. On the year, 10-10-2, 309 goals against, .906 save percentage, and 2 shutouts. But his goals saved above expected is 84th percentile. So he's typically, that indicates his level of skill, how good he is as a goaltender, and it doesn't take into account some of the other factors that are on his goalie hub. And speaking of, you can see it here. Here's his goals saved above expected, 84th percentile. The team exposure is what I don't like about Forsberg. Yeah, Ottawa's a good offensive team, but they're not a great defensive team. So he's getting a lot of opportunities against, and that doesn't necessarily help you in fantasy. But this does, the 84th percentile in terms of his skill level. The 906 is almost ownable for most leagues. I would, again, come back to the goaltending video I did earlier in the season. You'd like to see a 915. Anything above a 905 is potentially better than league average. So you're getting basically league average save percentage and probably around league average goals against average. 3.1 is not great, but it's not bad either. 10 wins, so his win percentile is pretty low compared to some of the starters because obviously he's in a tandem with Cam Talbot. But nonetheless, he had an excellent week, and going forward, they might be using him a little bit more. He is a very skilled goaltender. I rode him for a stretch last year, but with Talbot in net there this year and with the team exposure, the defense not being that great, I didn't necessarily want to go to that well this year, but if you're in need of a goaltender, he's definitely an option you could go to as a 1B, maybe a G2 or a G3 for your team, but excellent week for Anton Forsberg. And that brings us to the final segment here. This is the top changers on the Data Draft player rankings. And you can see all of these guys. This is basically filtering out on the player hub. This is guys who are over around 60 or better. So these are going to be your more fantasy relevant players and how much they've changed. I've highlighted a couple of the more significant changers. John Tavares had a good week. Chris Letang broke out. That first game back after losing his father and coming back from injury and whatnot, he went off in a crazy game. I believe it was 2 goals, 2 assists, it's a game winner, a bunch of other stuff that went into, I have him in a points league and he got a ton of points for me that night. So an excellent bump in his rating to an 82, and that puts him in some of the elite defenseman categories. And I mentioned him in the preseason as a guy who gets hits and blocks and gets offensive production. So that's potentially why he's this valuable in terms of his rating. Then you look at Patrick Laine. He had a great week as well. A bunch of goals. He's now a 72 rating on the Data Draft Player Hub. You got Rasmussen, however you pronounce it. He's playing top line minutes in Detroit, so that's bumped up his production a bit. We went over Vatrano. I went over Palmieri a little bit in the weekly video yesterday. We went over Schmaltz. I went over McCann yesterday in the weekly video, so if you haven't seen that, go check that out. Cam Fowler, I mentioned him yesterday as well. Andre Palat has been coming. This increase in his file is probably due to the fact that he didn't play for most of the season and he's getting back up to speed. So he's been increasing every week now since he's been back. He's now a 61. There's Jake Sanderson. We talked about him. I talked about Noah Cates. So this is just kind of confirmation that what we see in terms of the stats is playing out. What I show you in the weekly videos, in this video particularly, it's coming through in terms of their Data Draft Player Hub rating and how much they're improving that week to week. So these are some excellent resources. If you want the player hubs that you saw in this video, or the player rankings, or all of that, any of the data visualizations I use on the channel, you can get access to those in the Patreon link in the description below. And you can get access to that and our Data Draft Elite Fantasy Manager Discord group for $5 a month. You can get access to that and bounce some trade ideas off of us, some waiver pickups, some sit and start recommendations, things like that. We have an active community of really knowledgeable managers that are constantly making tweaks and adjustments, and you can bounce your ideas off of us, and we can do the same. So it's a great community to be part of, and you might want access to that as we head down the stretch into your fantasy playoffs. But that's going to do it for this one. Thank you for watching again. Remember to follow me on Twitter. Just got a Twitter account at data_draft. Same thing for the Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next one.